الأبصار مهطعين مقنعي رؤوسهم لا يرتد إليهم طرفهم وأفئدتهم هواء وأنذر الناس يوم يأتيهم العذاب فيقول الذين ظلموا ربنا فيقول الذين ظلموا ربنا أخرنا إلى أجل قريب نجب دعوتك ونتبع الرسل أولم تكونوا أقسمتم من قبل ما لكم من زوال وسكنتم في مساكن الذين ظلموا أنفسهم وتبين لكم كيف فعلنا بهم وضربنا لكم الأمثال وقد مكروا مكرهم وعند الله مكرهم وإن كان مكرهم لتزول منه الجبال فلا تحسبن الله مخلف وعده رسله إن الله عزيز ذو انتقام يوم تبدل الأرض غير الأرض والسماوات وبرزوا لله الواحد القهار وترى المجرمين يومئذ مقرنين تغشى وجوههم النار ليجزي الله كل نفس ما كسبت إن الله سريع الحساب هذا بلاغ للناس ولينذروا به وليعلموا أنما هو إله واحد وليذكر أولو الألباب صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh
حياكم
Fawad.
أكرمكم الله.
Just a little background about Sheikh Fawad. He did his theology degree from the Faculty of Islamic and Arabic Studies from Al Azhar, and he has held teacher. He's been an imam, a preacher, a teacher at the Ministry of Religious Endowment in Egypt, and is currently serving as the Quran teacher in the Muslim Center of Middlesex County. Jazakallah khair for your beautiful recitation. Now I'm going to read a message of solidarity from um, a, a Minister of Parliament from the UK, Shabana Mahmood. She has sent in a beautiful message to Kashmiris all over the world. Um, she says, my views on this issue as a proud British Kashmiri are long established. I continue to wholeheartedly support the rights of the Kashmiri people to self determination, and I repeat calls for any decisions regarding the status of Kashmir to be made by the Kashmiri people rather than the Indian government. Previously, I have called out the actions of the Modi government in suppressing the rights of people living in Kashmir and spoken in outrage at the Indian government's decision to revoke Article 370 and withdraw the autonomy of Kashmir. The removal of Kashmir's special status by the Indian government is provocative and risks further destabilizing the region. I continue to oppose the human rights violations by those acting on behalf of the Indian government in the strongest terms. The international community has a moral responsibility to ensure the rights of the Kashmiri people are upheld. We cannot and must not look the other way. My record speaks for itself. I have spoken out about the issue widely on television and radio news bulletins, repeating calls for freedom for Kashmir at every opportunity. The Labour Party has a long standing position supporting self determination for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Rest assured, I will continue to work alongside Labour Friends of Kashmir to uphold Labour's position on this issue in line with my long stated position and that of my constituents on the state of Kashmir. I will continue to support an open and constructive working relationship between my party and organizations representing the interests of Kashmiri people, encouraging policy making that makes the case for a lasting settlement of self determination for Jammu and Kashmir. After that, as we mark these 2 years since India's unilateral and illegal actions of 5th of August 2019 in the Indian occupied Kashmir. I now wish to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Athar Zia. She's a political anthropologist, a poet, a short fiction writer, and a columnist. She's associate professor in the Department of Anthropology and Gender Studies at the University of Northern Colorado, Greeley. She's authored a book, Resisting Disappearances, Military Occupation, and Women's Activism in Kashmir, which won the 2020 Gloria Anzaldo Honorable Mention Award and the 2021 Public Anthropologist Award. She was also Justice for All's hero, honoring our hero for 2021. uh, on behalf of the Kashmir Action Team. Thank you so much, Dr. Atazia, for being here.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Brother Jabbar. Thank you, Henna. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this to observe the 2-year anniversary of the removal of Article 370 from the region of Kashmir. I want to make a few remarks about what's happened since, and then also what, just kind of like thinking about future as well, because I think that's most important in this present moment. So that's kind of like a little gist of what I'll be doing. So as for people who don't know, in 2019, August 5th, what happened in Kashmir was that the government of India decided to do a unilateral removal of Kashmir's autonomy, the article that protected Kashmir's autonomy, Article 370 and Article 35A. So the first thing that I would like to state here is that when we talk about Kashmir's autonomy, and then we talk about it in a manner where we think that something really big has been taken away. While it's a very big issue, but at the same time, we need to understand what this article or what the special status was in its historical context. And that will kind of like also illuminate our future way or future ways of solidarity as well. So the autonomy that Kashmir had, that was sort of a truce between India and established a relationship with the Indian Constitution. What it actually did was while it was protecting Kashmir's territorial sovereignty under the Article 35A, but at the same time, it also gave India a thoroughfare, a Trojan horse, if you will, to put inside Kashmir. And it was through Article 370 as well. You know, it was a mechanism that kind of, on one side, gave the territorial sovereignty to Kashmiris and protected it. But on the other side, it also allowed India to, move in laws and statutes through presidential decrees initially, and then later on through judicial processes. And what ended up happening was that India essentially, from the moment it was signed, from 1949 onwards, started eroding it. So, what happened on August 5th was basically a completion of the project that had been started way back. So, that's something that we all need to understand. It's not a matter of getting the article back. It's not the matter of getting autonomy back or the territorial sovereignty back, because we have to understand that this is not just something that has happened now, it's just the completion. So I think that's very important for us to consider. And then also to think of Kashmiris, the relationship of Kashmiris with the article. While they do right now, they do more in the loss of the article because it protected territorial sovereignty, which means it also protected the indigenous rights of people. It protected them just like in any other country, which because they have since 1947 onwards really fearing demographic changes, settler colonialism. So the one part of this Article 370, which is the 35A, it protected Kashmir against any kind of demographic onslaught. Not that that wasn't already happening in some ways, but it wasn't as brazen as it has been since 2019 onwards. It was very discreet, it was done in different manners, but now there is no impediment to it. So that's something we need to understand. And Kashmiris, the relationship that Kashmiris had with Article 370 was just because of the territorial sovereignty, not because it was a relationship with India. There has been, a lot of jurists in India and in Kashmir, when they would think about Article 370, when they would think about Article 335A, they would think about what is going to happen if this was ever removed. And many people thought that this was an ironclad article. It would never be removed because once it was brought into force, the assembly which was required to kind of remove it was disbanded. So Kashmiris thought that this was ironclad, so the territorial sovereignty would always be there, even as the Article 370 was being eroded. And many jurists believed that this was just it would be a constitutional nightmare for India to remove it. But what we have seen in 2019, August 5th, what they did was they actually kept the article intact, but they de-operationalized it. So they've kind of like, found a way to eviscerate it basically and take it away. And what happened to Kashmiris in that moment was, we all know about the siege that took place, and we don't know where that siege started in August and 2019 and how it ended, whether it ended or not, because it directly went into the pandemic lockdown. So Kashmiris essentially have been under a siege for the last 2 years now. And Dr. Shah is going to talk about the economic aftermath and economic fallouts. But just to kind of think about the idea of development, because the way India sold this removal, which was unilateral, which was a militaristic removal, which was also a very undemocratic, and the reason I kind of like use undemocratic within the air quotes, it kind of gives us an idea that something democratic was happening inside Kashmir before that. But that's not true. There's never any kind of democracy being practiced inside Kashmir. What has been practiced by India from 1947 onwards is a politics of democracy. It basically weaponized electoral democracy to tell the world that it's kind of providing this governance to Kashmiris through a democratic setup. But that's just mere eyewash. So in our work, many scholars and writers and activists who are writing, thinking about critical Kashmir, thinking through critical lens about this region, they are of the opinion and they prove how India has been an annexation right from the very start. And that's another thing that we really need to think about in the aftermath of 2019, that how is it possible that you will not have any kind of people's will, you will not have the legislative assembly, you won't have any kind of consensus on board, and then you go on to remove what is essentially a people's rights. So even if we think like, even if we go back to 1947 or 1949 when this law came into effect, at that particular point in time, the client politicians who actually negotiated this truce with India, they also kind of like wanted to save Kashmir from the Indian influx. And we kind of like trace from that moment onwards that how is it possible that in every decade India has done what it has achieved in 2019 in its utter completion, which is in every decade India has taken some form of or eviscerated this autonomy little by little. So as I said earlier, and I kind of am repeating myself here, but I think it needs to be reiterated that in 2019, this was not new to Kashmiris. There's a Kashmiri who was asked by one of the media houses about what happened to you. This was just like for his observation. A journalist was asking him like, what happened on August 5th? And he said that India till now had been stabbing us in the back, but right now they stabbed us in front in 2019. So that's the only difference. And what it has done since is very damaging. Again, I reiterate, like when international community is thinking about this, thinking about solidarity, I would say that we have to really sift about what this movement is about. It's not about restoration of autonomy, so to speak. This is restoration of people's rights, people's right to self-determination, and choosing the kind of political destiny they want. And at the same time, also thinking about what has happened after 2019, which also sheds light on the intentions, the imperial neo-colonial intentions that India has on Kashmir and has always had. So the first thing that happened in haste was the change in domicile laws. Early on, you had a law where Indians could not buy land inside Kashmir. They just like any other country, just like United States, no one can come in and get the right to franchise and stuff like that because there are immigration laws. There is a certain criteria for citizenship and all of that. Similar was the case with Kashmir. And here I do want to reiterate that it's not as if Indians were not coming in and doing business. There were ways, and they had already kind of conquered that side, but the legal side was still protected by Article 35A and Article 370. So what happens in 2019 is India really hastens these changes in the domicile law, which means now they have a set criteria. It's a very nominal criteria that Indians can come in and they can get the domicile status. And it's in such haste that you have to give these people, whoever applies for it, the status within 15 days. And if the bureaucrat is kind of lax on it, and bureaucratic red tape is so notorious, but in this case, India doesn't want any of that. What it does is it will fine the bureaucrat if there is going to be any delay more than 15 days for issuance of this domicile status. So now we know how fast the process has been made. And why is it that the first thing that is done in an array of other things, the first most important thing is changing of the domicile status? One Kashmiri scholar has called it in one of his earlier works, as he's kind of comparing Palestine and Kashmir. He's called this demographic terrorism, that Kashmiris fear this demographic terrorism. And now with the rubric that BJP has, and again I reiterate, BJP has done nothing new. What it has done is, the only thing is the spectacle of this military power and spectacle that it showed, and it really gloats in that. But what has happened in the last 72 years is that Congress, which was the secular party, it has done pretty much the same thing. And one of the Congress leaders very recently, when he was asked about Article 370, he said that Congress had done it pretty much the same thing 12 times and no one really knows. And that kind of tells us the intentions of erosion of this autonomy, and final complete erasure was already on cards. And so going back to thinking about the aftermath, so the domicile was changed, and now there are lakhs. I don't know what the current statistics are because it keeps changing, and one can't really keep track of the things that are happening. So people are, these random bureaucrats from this place and that place. You kind of like hear these stories around their domicile status, and suddenly India is kind of like trying to narrativize this as these Indians coming in and then attaining the domicile status and telling other people that it's only now that Indians can go in and buy land and all of that, which is all hogwash, because this was also happening before in different manners. And the other thing that we also need to, which is also going to tie it to the larger anti-Islam and Muslim debate that's also taking place inside, not just the debate, but really tragic ramifications inside India, is the clause of gender discrimination, because India, while it was removing this article unilaterally and militarily while clamping down on Kashmiris in a most brutal manner, it was also saying that we are removing this because of gender discrimination. Now, these are all straw man arguments that India has given the rest of the world. And unfortunately, most of the world has bought these arguments without any questioning, except for a little bit here and there, and without any criticism, and let them do what they want inside this region. And essentially, if you look at what is happening inside Kashmir right now with the draconian laws that have been imposed since the last 33 years, and the kind of direct and indirect military annexation and action for the last 72 years, which has really gone under the radar, which has been invisibilized because India tries to sell to the rest of the world that they are practicing democracy, and it also gets away with its own camouflage of being this evolving and progressive democracy. So those are some of the questions that we need to ask. Like, how is it that this kind of situation is surfacing, is emerging, and has already existed in Kashmir? And how can a country call itself a democracy when this kind of a situation exists? So from 2019 onwards, what we have seen is, one is the complete removal of the domicile protections that Kashmiris had. We've also seen, as Dr. Shah later on is going to talk about, is this huge economic losses that Kashmiris are bearing at the moment, and how extractive economies are being installed so that Kashmiris do not have the same rights over the resources that they had before. But we also have to remember that it doesn't mean that India had not taken away their rights over their indigenous resources before. They're already been taken in different manners, but now there is no impediment. There's no sort of like this camouflage of protection for the Kashmiris as existed earlier. So the other thing that I do want to talk about, and I'll conclude after that, is if you want to take the canary in the coal mine, thinking about freedom of expression, we look at journalism in the current moment. Like, what has happened to the journalists in the last 2 years? Even though censorship and surveillance has been part of Kashmiri's life, for the last 72 years, increasingly and intensely for the last 33 years. But what we have seen in the last 2 years is institutionalization of censorship. There is a media law that has been put into place where reporters are actually told not to report, and their reporting is threatening the sovereignty of India. And every now and then you hear that journalists are harassed, humiliated. They cannot get they cannot get accreditation, and so goes for the media houses as well. If they're not towing the government line, so technically they have to present government of India in the most positive light, and if they don't, they are heavily humiliated, repressed, and thrown into jails, or terror charges are filed against them. And that's what we have seen in the last 2 years. And this has been seen before, as I said. So that's something that's really that kind of connects to this idea of the normalcy that India really peddles. Right now, if you see the Indian headlines, if you look at the people across India talking about August 5th and removal of Article 370, you see them talking about everything is normal in Kashmir, and people, there's development. So development, as already Kashmiri activists and scholars and writers have already, they have proven that these are strawman arguments that have been provided to the rest of the world. Not that most of the world needed those, because no one was raising questions as Kashmiris were being re-annexed. But the fact is that Kashmiris kind of have answered, have given those responses. But even then, India is currently doing this propaganda of normalcy, and it is doing this ops inside Kashmir to tell the rest of the world that everything is going on as per normal. As we speak today, back in Kashmir, as you know, most of the Tehreek, which is the Tehreek means the movement, the leadership is under arrest, or they're dispersed in different ways, or they're embattled in different kinds of cases. So they're fighting on all fronts. So right now, there is no Tehreek or resistance leadership actively being kind of like leading the people. So what you see in this moment, which is really something that we all should take note of, is that Kashmiri community in itself is a leader. They have become leaders over the last 72 years. Not that they've never were leaders, because when you have a leadership vacuum, and I don't mean to say vacuum in the sense that there are no leaders, but because there is a heavy silencing and repression of Kashmiris happening in the moment. But what Kashmiris do in these moments is they kind of like take the community takes the leadership. So what had happened was they were observing a shutdown for August 5th, and no one comes out on the roads. It's a civil boycott. People, it's a civil curfew, so to speak. People don't come out. So it's a very peaceful kind of resistance. So Kashmiri shopkeepers, they had kept their shops closed. And what we saw since morning, which is their night, and their Twitter is awash with these clips, where the store owners, their shops are being opened by the police. They're breaking in. They're they're breaking the locks. They're breaking their shutters and making them open the stores and asking them to just maintain normalcy, be normal. And then we also heard these diktats coming from the police, where the police euphemistically was threatening Kashmiris for not doing a civil boycott. And if they did, there's going to be no government support. So you see how much euphemisms and these words are being deployed to kind of like very diplomatically sort of threaten Kashmiris. And also, of course, with direct violence as well. But at the same time, just for the international community. And we also saw recently, because there was push from the Biden administration, and there's also push from other international fora to kind of restore some semblance, because the world doesn't need democracy. It needs semblance. It needs camouflage of democracy. And India was ready to give it to them. So the client politicians inside Kashmir who peddle Indian government's politics, they were kind of called to Delhi, but then they were completely undermined. And for the last 2 years, even pro-India politicians who have carried India's water for the last 72 years, they were thrown out of the equation. So we see repression in all forms. But as I said, this morning, August 5th, as we knew that many things would not be able to happen on ground in Kashmir, we saw the civil boycott had already taken place, and people had already decided themselves. This kind of shows this community as a leader and voicing their dissent in the most peaceful manner. So all is not lost. I feel what we need to do as an international, as we are speaking at an international level, so to speak, we have to think of a global solidarity that really takes cognizance of the fact that has always been a peaceful, just resistance, except when Kashmiris were pushed to the corner, and right now they are in corner as well. And the other thing is rescuing Kashmiri resistance from the slurs of terrorism. That's what India calls it, and that's how India kills Kashmiris, which are war crimes, so to speak. But then it gets away by calling every Kashmiri who shows dissent, whether they are armed or unarmed, or they are using a pen, or they're using a gun, but everyone is blanket called a terrorist. So I think we need to think about how to rescue this resistance from the slur of terrorism, and also thinking about the very heavily anti-Islam stance that India has. And we also know that what's happening inside Kashmir is on BJP's agenda, is also, of course, on an entire Indian political agenda for the longest possible time. But with BJP, it's more brazen that it is to change the nature and to change the face of Kashmir, which doesn't mean that Kashmiris don't need a syncretic society. They don't want to live in a diverse society, but it's also for them, it's also invoking the tyranny and the indentured slavery that the Muslim population lived under the previous Hindu regime, which belonged to the previous monarch before 1947. So we need to take cognizance of that historical fact as well. And that's where I'll stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Athar, for your perspectives. I'm going to invite now MP Afzal Khan. He was elected the Labour MP for Manchester in 2017 and has served as the Shadow Minister for Immigration and the Shadow Foreign Office Minister in 2019 to 2020. He's also the Vice Chair of several all-party parliamentary groups, including British Muslims, Adult Social Care, Poverty, and Greater Manchester. Afzal Khan.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. I'm Afzal Khan MP, and I want to thank Justice for All US for organizing this timely seminar on Kashmir. There can be no doubt over the serious nature of the conflict in Kashmir, or the devastating number of deaths. At 73 years, the conflict in Kashmir is the longest unresolved conflict on the agenda of the UN. 2 years ago, today, the Indian government's Jammu and Kashmir reorganization bill unilaterally revoked Article 370 and replaced the autonomous state of Jammu and Kashmir with the 2 new union territories governed directly by Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir and
Dr. Mubin Shah. He's the former Kashmiri Chamber of Commerce president. He's also a former political prisoner. He's going to be speaking on the economic desperation in Kashmir and its historical perspective, but especially how it has been impacted after August 5th, 2019. We're really, really pleased that you're free and you're here to speak with us. I remember the congressional meetings and the hearings that were held here in the United States, and your name came up over and over again. So we're really, really grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're free and safe.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me for this webinar, and certainly I would love to speak on the economic aspect of this action by the government of India in August 2019. We have to first put it in a proper perspective, this economic downturn, and before I do that, I would like to sort of give an idea and overall view of the economy of Kashmir. You know, our economy is basically agricultural, but at the same time that we have certain sectors which are very, very important for us. economically, and there is our tourism. It is, handicrafts, horticulture, then normal as such, trade, transport, and then service industries. Now, keeping in view that the economics in Kashmir was already very bad in the sense that, because of non-settlement of Kashmir from 1947, we have to understand that that Kashmir did not come to its potential. For example, if you take tourism into as an industry or as an economic activity, and you see around places like Singapore, Turkey, UAE, who get about 21, 14, 20 people, whereas in Kashmir, being beautiful place and so the Asia type
Assalamu
for Turkey, the other, and even before you the number of people within the span of or three by any, if it would have no problems. You could imagine the economic activity of Kashmir if the Kashmiri issue would have been. And that is why I recall when I became the president in 2006 of Kashmir Chamber of Commerce, and I had lived in Singapore for quite some time. I had been my business away, had seen the countries grow and become economic powerhouses based on tourism, based on trading activities. And then when I would, when I went back and wanted to do something for the economy of Kashmir. So at that time, I realized that how much losses our economy is going through because of non-settlement of Kashmir. And on top of it, see, particularly from 1990, the number of days which have been lost in the Kashmir economy is something like 3,000 days. And, if you add for example, from August 5th, 2019, when there was a complete, closure of all business activity in Kashmir, and my parent organization, which I used to be president for 3 years, the Kashmir Chamber of Commerce and Industry, has sort of made an estimation. In the last 2 years, $7 billion of losses have happened. First, in about 45,000 crores in August 5th, and then because of the COVID. The world understands that when all businesses close, what happens? And every segment of society, when economic activity gets stopped. So we Kashmiris have been facing that, particularly after 1990, but certainly after 1947 also. So it is imperative that this has to be taken into account by besides the human rights violations. It is also a human right violation as such of not being able to do the economic activity as per requirements or as per the need of the people. So, this is, and we have to understand that who is not doing this settlement for Kashmir. Basically, I recall with the Hurriyat in 2006 as president of the chamber, and there was this talk about about President Musharraf's 4-point formula. And we were called by the Hurriyat to talk about the future of Kashmir, economic future of Kashmir. And, and I raised a question with the Hurriyat leadership that, before I tell you the economic future of Kashmir, let me tell you about the losses we have had because of non-settlement of Kashmir. And for that, we hold responsible mainly India, because it has put all the stumbling blocks of resolving it by negotiations or by any other forms. And second, by the P5 countries, the United Nations Security Council, because they are not implementing not getting the implementation done of the resolution of right of self-determination of Kashmiris. And you can understand the losses. If you compare the last 2 years' losses and then compare it with 3,000 days, that is 10 times, the losses. And then from 47, you can understand what the losses of Kashmiri businessmen are facing. It is a generation to generation. For example, my father, suppose, built a business. I have lost that business, and I have lost that business because of the political problem. And this other generation, then I again restarted, try to restart it. Then my next generation is not able to sustain it because of non-settlement of Kashmir. And I also recall that, in particular in India, I basically was an exporter also, because I had businesses outside Malaysia, Singapore, and Dubai. So I used to go to Moradabad also for purchase of handicraft items. And there I saw that in Moradabad, the people from my community, Muslim community, they have been, but they are not able to grow in that manner what they should have grown. Because whenever there used to be a Hindu-Muslim war, would go down again and then restart. This is the model which we in Kashmir are now facing completely. After 2019, it has become more aggravated, and we are seeing businesses bust. The people who had tried to sort of become taken loans from banks, they are not able to repay. First, because of the August 5th problem, and then because of COVID. And the Kashmir Chamber of Commerce, for example, or any organization, tried to tell the government that it will be done, which only after August 2019. But before this also, that the sickness in our industrial sector was to the range of even 90% after 1990, 95% sickness, and because of non-settlement of Kashmir. So it is, while remembering the reoccupation, we have to understand it is because of the militarization of Kashmir and non-settlement of Kashmir that the economic fallout is much, much more grave than what people realize and understand. It is only after August 5th the world, or for that matter, even people in otherwise also would not realize what are the losses which are incurred because of this. And and I will also further add on that that it is basically we have lost about, as per estimation, the number of people, 50,000 jobs lost, 500,000 jobs lost, and including 60,000 employed in the tourism and horticulture sector. Now, if you see the horticulture sector, for example, see, our problems of our horticulture sector were because we did not have the capacity to store our fresh food, and then we have to transport it within the first 30 days or max for 30 days, particularly our apple produce. And after August 2019, trucks would not come. There was complete closure of everything, and all that industry became they became bankrupt in the sense that they were not able to export their produce. So the only thing before this 2019 or before COVID, which would make us survive, was the handicraft industry, because even if it was closure, at least the production was going on in homes. But unfortunately, after in the world, there's a recession because our handicrafts is considered luxurious items, and because of this, and our handmade carpet industry is almost wiped out, because that is at this point of time, those people, artisans, are not able to make the produce because there's no market for it. Before 2019, there was a market for it because of, but we were able to prove, and at least that was one sector which was making us survive in horticulture before 2019. But after 2019, these two sectors also got mainly affected because of everything was closed, transport was closed, everything was closed in Kashmir particularly. So this is just giving you an idea about the losses we have incurred. And now on top of it, the Indian government, there is a move by which they are on one hand, telling that there will be a lot of investment coming from outside. What we fear as business people also there in Kashmir is that besides the change in demography, is that the businesses which were owned by Kashmiris will be taken over by these outsiders at throwaway prices, because they will be bankrupt and they will be owing the banks. They will not have the position to pay the banks, and an asset worth crores of rupees will be given away for lakhs of rupees. So this is another aspect which may come to the fore, because when we started campaigning against the removal of 370, it was in the works, but we did not know that the Indian government will go to this extent and abruptly. But we were only not concerned about 370 as such, as civil society activists or as a business activist. That we were concerned about 35A because of the demography part of it. And now I fear, being in exile for 2 years, because I feel that I cannot go back to Kashmir till there is a settlement of Kashmir, and because of my activities, and because I when I tell certain facts, and which are very, very true, and particularly now I fear that all these businesses which are being owned by Kashmir will be taken out by outsiders, particularly, for example, in the hotel industry. Initially, they created a bogey that, the leases are finished, this is there, then we can put it in auction and all that. But now it is also because of this thing that the businesses have not done well because of this problem. No business can survive or become viable if you are, out of 300 days, you are, open only for 20 days, 30 days. And at the same time, unfortunately, because of COVID, and the government does not come forward to defer those loan payments. And for example, if in the United States at this point of time, there was a hue and cry for people who have taken mortgages, and the people and the senators and all fought for it, that it should be extended. The same, the same situation is all the time for Kashmiri businessmen in Kashmir, that they can be anytime their businesses can be taken over, and this is another form of occupation which will come forward in days to come. I fear that, and this is what another fight we have to do for that part. So this is what I feel I would like to, I was thinking that I should bring to notice to the people all over the world that this is what it is about the economic situation in Kashmir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and that analysis on what is happening with business in Kashmir. Our next speaker is Harman Kaur. She is the General Secretary for the US at the World Sikh Parliament Division of Civil and Human Rights Council. So she will be speaking in solidarity with the Kashmiri people. Harman?
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm Harman Kaur, and I am a college student at University of Central Oklahoma, and I'm majoring in political science. And first of all, I would like to show solidarity with our Kashmiri brothers and sisters. I'm giving the Sikh community perspective. Our struggles are pretty much, the same in the country that calls itself a secular country. And the Sikh community stands in solidarity. And first of all, I would like to look at the importance of Article 370. So Article 370 acknowledged the special status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir in terms of autonomy and its ability to formulate laws for the state's permanent residents. So in conclusion, Jammu and Kashmir had the independence to make laws and had its own identity irrespective of the central government. But unfortunately, on August 5, 2019, which is exactly 2 years ago, the Parliament of India voted in favor of a resolution tabled by the Home Minister Amit Shah to revoke the special status, which granted autonomy to Jammu and Kashmir. And to me, it's like symbolizing how the Indian government teared away the identity of Kashmir and, what they stand for. And, tens of thousands of additional Indian troops were deployed. Schools and colleges were shut down. Tourists were ordered to leave. And, internet and telephone services were suspended, and regional political leaders were placed under house arrest. This is very similar to what the Sikh community entailed back in 1984 when Punjab faced a blackout and they attacked the holy place, the Darbar Sahib, the Golden Temple. So I can see a lot of similarities how the Indian government treats their marginalized groups like this. And the Modi government argued that it needed, like the Article 370 needed to be scraped down to integrate Kashmir and put it onto the same footing as the rest of India. So this shows that how much tolerance that the Indian government has towards groups and religions that are minority and that those are not Hindus. So they put the veil of being a secular state in front of the world and commit heinous crimes behind it. India is no longer away from becoming how the Nazi regime was under Hitler. And this is not the first time that the Indian government has marginalized minorities. Under Modi, if you look back, there are many incidents where Babri Masjid was struck down to build a Hindu temple. Holy books of different religions like Christians and Sikhs have been burnt down, and they always play with our sentiments. In Gujarat, under Modi regime, Muslims were exterminated. They committed the genocide, and Sikhs were asked to leave their farms, and they sustain on farming, and that's the only livelihood they had in Gujarat. And there are so many incidents like this happening. And to me, as working in the Sikh community and as a college student living here and studying politics, what I see is that in conclusion, we must, minorities, religion group in India have to work together to expose India at an international level and mask off the false democracy they have. Even when 1947, whenever the Indian Constitution was made, I think so. The Constitution was never made with a pure minded way because they always started to tear down little by little every community, as other speakers have said, that Article 370 was just like, just a direct attack. They were stabbing, they were stabbing other minority groups, but this was just a direct attack now. And slowly they're coming out, and they're not being noticed by the international community. So I feel like instead of working in groups, I think so we need to, work together, show solidarity with our communities. This is not only happening with Kashmiris, they also have with Sikhs and other Dalit groups in India, and, they're not treated the same. So I feel like if we stand at one voice, we can take this issue at an international level and mask off the veil and the democracy that India wears and calls itself the largest democracy in the world. So I think so it's very important in the coming years that we stand together and work together and show and expose what India really is. So I would just like to conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Herman, for those heartfelt words. Now I'm going to invite Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. He's the CEO and founder of Justice for All, the president of Sound Vision, and he's the chair emeritus of the World Parliament of Religions. Bismillah, Imam Mujahid, please take over.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Well, thank you so much, Hina, and thank you, Dr. Abdul Jabbar, Imam Dr. Abdul Jabbar, for organizing this program. I was hearing with thoughtful information and taking notes. I am hopeful for Kashmir. And number one reason for my hope are Kashmiris themselves. Despite 90-year-long struggle for freedom, they have not given up. Their voice is stronger. Their voices are more articulate. They are more available in the academics as well as in the journalism area. As a result, the world is coming around, but it will take time, definitely. To give you more hope, I would say that Palestine issue in America is far more difficult issue. Far more difficult issue. I will not go in the detail of it, but I witnessed in Charlotte Convention of Democratic National Committee, the delegates, tens of thousands of them, how younger people were changing the discourse. And just last week, a survey came out, which was published by Brookings Institution, but it is done by University of Maryland on Palestine issue. And they say young people with the margin of 1 to 3 want America to side with Palestinians. So they ask a question, should America side with Israel? Should it stand neutral, or should it side with Palestinian? So younger people, 1 to 3 margin, are in support of United States siding. President Biden has consistently approval rating. Accept this issue. When question was asked, how was his handling of Gaza? A majority of Americans said no, he was not successful, majority. Give you an example among Republicans. Republicans have 10%, 8 to 10% approval rating of President Biden. But on this particular issue, 20% Republican thought President Biden failed. In America, Palestine is far difficult issue, but it is changing. How is it changing? Because of awareness, education, which we give less importance, but it should be given much more importance. And of course, dedication of some people and openness of Palestinian allowing everybody to speak on this issue. So as a result, there are literally hundreds of organizations in this country who work on Palestine issue. Not all are Muslim, not all of them are Muslim. Actually, there are very few Muslim groups. And that change and transform. In that way, I think Kashmir issue is at the threshold of becoming an international issue. Yes, Pakistan and Kashmiris want United Nations resolution to be implemented. And Nehru promised that my promise not only to Kashmiri people, but to the whole world is that Kashmiris will decide about their future. They lied. This Brahman lied to people. But other than that, issue has not been an international issue. Yes, people know there were 3 wars between Pakistan and India. But Kashmir, Kashmiri voices, this is the time when it is coming out very uniquely. So I would suggest 3 success strategies. First strategy is communication, mastering art and technology of communication to tell the story of Kashmir. Half videos. I like to see multiple documentaries on that. Mass graves. Multiple documentaries need to be on that. Torture. There could be many things developed on that particular aspect of it. So telling our story from Kashmiris, by Kashmiris, about Kashmir is critical. Second is coalition building. In America, as Harman Kaur was saying, we need to work together. In America, there are a lot of people who stand up for the causes of justice, but they need education, and they're willing to. I remember I'm an anti-war person and part of, had Muslim Network, Muslim Peace Coalition and all that. So I was in a rally speaking about Iraq war, and there was no mention among those 200-300 people about Afghanistan. So I challenged them, do you think this war is bad war and that war is a good war? I had people approaching me to teach them, educate them, and they started changing. I don't want to take all the credit. Of course, there's a whole lot of people, but in this area, that has started happening. So developing coalition, working with other people, I think is going to be a thing. Third thing I would say is care for all people, including Hindus, and Muslims are good in there. Kashmiris are good in there, but intersectionality, that while we are criticizing the government, we care for Hindu people as an individual. Intersectionality of issue, that other issues and this issue need to intersect and people need to see. So there are a whole lot of people in America who are waiting to hear from us. And if some of you who are present here, if there's one thing you can take with us, is a personal sense of responsibility that Kashmiris are standing for themselves. Are we standing with them? I believe, in conclusion, tide is turning. Yes, there is a better media coverage, and India is getting worst possible coverage of its life in the West. There is hope. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair, Imam Mujahid. Now we're going to hear from MP Afzal Khan from the United Kingdom.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. I'm Afzal Khan MP, and I want to thank Justice for All US for organizing this timely seminar on Kashmir. There can be no doubt over the serious nature of the conflict in Kashmir or the devastating number of deaths. At 73 years, the conflict in Kashmir is the longest unresolved conflict on the agenda of the UN. 2 years ago, today, the Indian government's Jammu and Kashmir reorganization bill unilaterally revoked Article 370 and replaced the autonomous state of Jammu and Kashmir with the 2 new union territories governed directly by Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. Further to this, Jammu and Kashmir have been in an Indian Army-imposed lockdown, with the Indian government citing security risks and the need to prevent violence. The lockdown, along with the communications blackout, which has had a profound and far-reaching impact on every aspect of life in Kashmir, including health service, economy, school closures, and press freedom. This militarization of occupied Kashmir is the highest concentration of military anywhere in the world. And you have a conflict of 3 countries, India, Pakistan, and China. All 3 are a nuclear power and have gone to war on this territory. So I think in addition to this, the forced closure of Amnesty International in India, a reputable human rights organization, indicates the lack of accountability and the deterioration of human rights in India. The BJP government continues its onslaught on minorities. Now, whether it is the Kashmiris, Dalits, Christians, or Sikh, they continue to violate international law. And I am deeply worried that if they continue on this trajectory, India will be far from the largest democracy it once claimed to be. There is a renewed hope that the US can now play a role in brokering peace in the region, following President Biden's election win. The new administration has expressed their stance on Kashmir, with the Vice President Kamala Harris stating that we have to remind Kashmiris that they are not alone in this world. We are keeping track of the situation. There is a need to intervene if the situation demands. Furthermore, in Biden's campaign agenda, he made it very clear that restrictions on dissent and shutting down the internet weakens democracy. I certainly hope that these words are followed by tangible action and that the voices of our Kashmiri brothers and sisters in the US are heard. I also think there is a great potential for a bilateral efforts between the UK and US, and is something which I would be very keen to explore. It's important that today we express solidarity with the Kashmiris and ensure we raise awareness of this long-standing conflict. As the parliamentary chair of the Labour Muslim Network and the vice chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Kashmir, I reaffirm my commitment to the Kashmiri cause and promise to continue raising this important issue in the British Parliament. I will continue to do this for my Kashmiri brothers and sisters till they are free to live peacefully in the country of their choice and the way they want to live their life. Thank you.
That was MP Afzal Khan from the United Kingdom. And now we're going to have our most important, I feel, because this is a very action-oriented part of the program. Justice for All has started a Prisoners of Haq campaign. This is a project, actually. This is what we are, throughout our issues. You know, we work on Burma, on India, on Kashmir, Uyghurs. We're highlighting, we're starting off with 5 Kashmiri prisoners and highlighting them. We've been doing this with webinars on our Save India team. And the Free Kashmir team has inaugurated its first prisoner that we have started advocacy for and have been doing so at the United States Commission for International Freedom, as well as other human rights arenas, is Shabir Shah. So today we have with us in video because obviously she will not be able to join us directly. She's willing and able to from Kashmir, but she has been, her internet has been communications. We can't make any communications with her right now. And she'd warned us about that before this program. In the same manner, our other 2 speakers, I just wanted to give you all an update. Brother Munir Alam will not be able to speak. He's been denied permission to speak by the Indian authorities. And we all want you to make dua for Sheikh Tajammul because he has been, he's ill, he has contracted COVID and he's hospitalized right now. So please keep him in your duas. But without any further ado, let's have Seher speak about her father. And then inshallah, we are going to be sharing links where if you want to get involved in Shabir Shah's case, in doing advocacy for him or any of the 5 other Kashmiri prisoners that we're highlighting, then you'll be able to get involved, inshallah. So if you could please play Sahar's video. I have placed in the chat box a link to Shabir Shah's campaign page on our website. And there is a form there. And if you would like to get involved, please do fill out that form. And we'll be reaching out to you with ways that you can get involved.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Seher Shabir Shah. I'm daughter of the prisoner of conscience Shabir Shah, the person who started the freedom movement long back. This man, from the age of 14, dedicated his life to the Kashmir struggle. He was first arrested at the age of 14 in 1968. At present, he is in Tihar jail, scripting the new history of resistance. My father, Shabir Shah, is among the front-run resistance leaders of Kashmir who always stood for the peaceful resolution of Kashmir dispute. For his different political opinion, India has always put my father, Shabir Ahmed Shah, behind bars to silence his political voice. He was termed as the prisoner of conscience by human rights watchdog Amnesty International in May 1995. He is a Kashmiri leader who has seen and suffered the agonies of slavery. In his 33 years of imprisonment, he has been subjected to brutal tortures till his 20 years of reiterating an established fact and acknowledged truth. Shabir Shah has exhibited high qualities of patience, perseverance, gentleness, and sobriety. He was subjected to torture in the most notorious interrogation centers and prisons all over India. Not only him, but also his entire family had to pay a huge price, including his father's custodial killing. He spent his life languishing in jails all over India with no proved case against him. He was also known as the Nelson Mandela of Kashmir when he completed 20 years in prison. But now he has broken the record. He has spent more than 33 years of his life in prison for the Kashmir cause. Despite of innumerable and continuous miseries brought to him, he remains steadfast, strong, brave, and unshakable in his commitment towards a cause for which he has given his life. He remains untired and his resolve remains as strong as and fresh as it was 50 years back when he started his long and just struggle towards a much cherished goal of resolving the Kashmir issue. He has led from the front and has always been in harm's way. Away from the limelight, he continues to languish in Indian jails in pathetic conditions. Whenever he was free from jails, he talked about unity amongst Kashmiris for carrying forward the mission of freedom in extreme and warlike conditions. He has always stood for peaceful methods of resolving the Kashmir dispute. He has never shied away from talks with anyone who is willing to talk about Kashmir, always portraying the real picture of the plight of Kashmiris and the dark future of the subcontinent without resolving the core issue of Kashmir. He has talked to all the former prime ministers of India, foreign dignitaries, including senior George Bush, diplomats, and leaders across the globe who understand the nuances of Kashmir problem. He has never been provided with a passport so that he could travel and let the civilized people around the world to listen to our plight and raise our voice in the corridors of powers of the world for resolution of complex Kashmir issue. He himself was offered power many times just to derail him from the line of speaking and leading the cause of Kashmir, which he never accepted, and chose a life of immense hardship and jails. It's on record that he has spent more than 33 years of prisons in prisons across India with hundreds of cases against him without even a single case proven against him. Visiting my father Shabir Shah in Asia's most notorious jail, Tihar Jail, New Delhi, has been always been emotionally overwhelming for me. For most of my life, I have been seeing my father behind a glass window, so small that I could barely see his face, so blurred that I could hardly picture him. I could picture the shadow like thing. In the jail, I could neither touch him nor see him. And what I used to do, I used to put my hand on the window, and so did he. And it used to feel like we are holding our hands. I'm very attached to my father and his continuous detention, the way they tortured him, interrogated him, and kept him with criminals accused of rapes, murders, and thefts, where he couldn't get enough food to eat, worsened my health. As per the medical records, he has been diagnosed with severe health ailments, block in arteries, diabetes mellitus, hypertension, and many other health ailments. My father, Shabir Shah, is seriously unwell, but his morale is very high. On one meeting, he saw me a bit disturbed, and in a bold voice, like a lion, he said that even after completing 34 years of imprisonment, I am as strong as I was in 1968. It is intolerable to see a non-violent, peace-loving person being treated as a criminal and not as a political prisoner. I do miss him as he's my father, and I get hallucinations. I see my father, I hear his voice, and currently I am under high dosages of medications. But whatever little time I have spent with him, he has engraved a sense of a fighter in me to stand against oppression and to stand for the rights of Kashmiris, which was promised to us. Each day of his life inspires us to be steadfast, sincere, and brave in taking any course of action which leads us towards the truth, and we stand for our rights and oppressed people of Kashmir and the unjust onslaught against us. Currently, he's in Tihar Jail, New Delhi, since 2017, with a fake fabricated, politically motivated case where the main accused has been released already. In more than 34 years of cases, the prosecutor couldn't prove a single case against my father. Though my father, Shabir Shah, is a firm believer of political resistance, however, he is being punished by the political leadership of India. Now, when his health and his condition has further deteriorated and has endangered his life, I, as a daughter, stress upon the human rights organizations to come to the rescue of the prisoner of conscience before it's too late. There are indeed many more that have valiantly struggled and suffered in different ways for the same cause, for the vindication and realization of the basic right of self expression and other democratic rights. People languished in jails have encountered untold hardships and have made immense sacrifices. If it not only affects the people who are in prison, but their families too. And my appeal to the civilized world of to the people of the civilized world is to recognize a peaceful struggle of a person who is fighting for the rights of his people which were promised. It's the people of Kashmir for whom and with whom he is struggling each day of his life for a free and beautiful future of Kashmir. After presenting just a gist of who my father is, I, Seher Shabir Shah, am proud that I'm a daughter of a warrior, a living legend, the Shabir Shah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sahar, for your strength. And so this is a commitment that we're making to work on and push for the release of Shabir Shah. And hopefully all of you have received the link that you can sign in if you want to get involved with this, inshallah. We don't have a lot of time left, and so I think I'm going to defer my very short presentation on the Kashmiri prisoners of conscience that we have chosen to be working on. Inshallah, we will follow up with another panel on this and be sharing toolkits on that. For those of you who are on this call, please share this. A lot of people always ask, what can we do? What can we do, right? So this is something that you can do. This is something that you can get involved in. Some of the other to-do lists that we have shared with you, action items, is there's a khutbah developed for Kashmir that we would like you to send to your khatibs, your imams, your local masjid leadership, and ask them to remember Kashmir and Kashmiris in their next khutbah. So that link has already been shared. If you're in Canada, there's a whole entire link of action items that we have shared in the chat box. And in any case, the one, as you heard Seher spoke, I had like shivers down my spine just thinking of what all this family has gone through. We owe it to them. We owe it to Asiya Andrabi. We owe it to Asif Sultan. We owe it to Sister Sophie and to the others that are languishing in prisons. And things can be done. Prisoners have been released. So let's get to work, inshallah. So I'd like to call on Imam Abdul Jabbar, our team lead, and who's put together this wonderful program to finish the night tonight, inshallah, remembering God with a beautiful dua, inshallah.
Before I make a concluding prayer, I will express my thankfulness to all the speakers, the panelists who have devoted their valued time to this webinar. I understand that this time, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time is not good time for the speakers from UK. And it is also not a good time for Mubin Shah, but alhamdulillah, he made it. This was early in the morning for him, where he's living now in exile. And it is also not a good time for people in occupied Kashmir, also because of the oppressive and suppressive policies and practice of Indian government that our Kashmiri brothers from the Valley of Kashmir were not able to connect with the webinar. I also include in the dua our brother Sheikh Tajamul Islam, the executive director of Kashmir Media Service, who was quite eager to participate in this program, but what happened that he got COVID just 3 days ago. And in our dua, we especially include all the speakers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the peace, progress, and prosperity and long life to serve this great lofty purpose of struggle for Kashmir. This dua is for Dr. Atar Zia, Dr. Mubin Shah, Muhammad Afzal Khan, and also our duas are for Harman Kaur. Let's make dua. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihi Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تباركت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم انصر المسلمين المظلومين في كشمير المحتلة. اللهم انصر المسلمين أينما كانوا ومن كانوا. اللهم انصر المسلمين في الصين وفي بورما وفي سريلانكا وفي فلسطين. اللهم زلزل أقدام الظالمين وانصر على أعداء الدين. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وجعلنا منهم، واخذل من خذل دين محمد ولا تجعلنا منهم. اللهم انصر الذين أخرجوا من ديارهم وأوذوا في سبيلك. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our prayers for the people of Kashmir is full of hope. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help to bring lasting peace in Kashmir and other parts of the world where our brothers and sisters are being persecuted, like our brothers in Palestine, in China, in Burma, and Sri Lanka. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we pray for the turmoil to end. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our hearts go out to the innocent children of Kashmir who were maimed and blinded due to pellet guns. And our hearts go to the youth who have been picked up from their homes and are detained in the jails of India, thousands of miles away from their homes. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inculcate sabr jameel to those parents who have lost their children and youth during this struggle. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give the innocent Kashmiris the strength to deal with the oppression they encounter. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. صلى الله تعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين يا رب العالمين.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Abdul Jabbar. Thank you for your leadership and thank you for that beautiful dua. Dr. Atazia, if you just have a few minutes of your time, officially our panel has ended, and if those who want to leave can leave. There have been, there's a question by Amina Jamal to you that I think deserves a few minutes of your time if you could possibly stay. That she's a part of a critical diasporic South Asian feminisms in Canada, a diverse group of South Asian women, academics, Indians, Pakistanis, Hakka, Bengali, Tamil, and Parsi, who want to avoid re-inscribing the toxic nationalisms, cultural patriarchies, and various kinds of oppressions that get obscured by the term South Asia. What advice would you give us in relations to teaching and writing about women in Kashmir?
Thank you so much for your question. I think what critical Kashmir studies as a sub-discipline in the last 15 years has tried to do is tried to rescue Kashmiri women from brown imperial feminism that Indian activists, Indian scholars kind of have been propagating around Kashmir, in which Muslim Kashmiri men have been demonized to the extent that, you know, when the autonomy was taken away, they kind of created and they kind of portrayed the autonomy as if it was this patriarchal Muslim setup in which women were kind of held down and repressed by these Muslim men. But then it was kind of like under this rubric of patriarchy. So, I mean, there can be a number of suggestions that I can give, but one is reading Kashmiri scholars. I think for the last 15, 20 years, Kashmiri scholars, activists, journalists, creative writers have written a lot about Kashmir. They have written a lot about, you know, if you look at it from the feminist praxis, they have also sort of like tried to decolonize their history, which has been sold to the rest of the world. So I think reading Kashmiri scholars and engaging with Kashmir in a historical fashion, not just from the last 33 years, or even from 1947, but kind of going beyond that, is very important to get to kind of like practice the feminist praxis that we want to do with regards to Kashmir. So reading Kashmiri scholars and reading, you know, scholars from the subcontinent, of course, but Kashmiris have been speaking. And so that's one thing. And the other thing that I would say is that, you know, a lot of feminist discourse has happened around Kashmiri women and Kashmiri patriarchy in the Indian side as well. So looking and engaging with those writings and kind of comparing them to what Kashmiris are saying is a very productive way of also looking at Kashmir's history and looking at Kashmir, what it really means for Kashmiris, so to speak. Because, you know, one of the things that Indians like to say, or Indian discourse kind of builds, is that Kashmiri women have no say, have no say from before 1947 or after. But all of those, you know, the things that are coming to light and people who are writing and engaging with it, especially from Kashmir, they are giving you a vantage that is completely different. And not to say that patriarchy doesn't exist, not to say cultural patriarchy doesn't exist, but how unique Kashmir also has been in trying to bring, you know, their voices to light, and how women have supplemented in that role. So I think first and foremost, engaging with Kashmiri writers, engaging with Kashmir history, because one of the obfuscation that India has done especially is completely negate Kashmir's history from 1947 onwards and before 1947. And I think one of the feminist things to do is not to speak to just this context of what has happened from 1989 onwards, but to look, why is it that these things happen in 1989? Why is it that communities get torn asunder? Why is it that Kashmiris suddenly, you know, arise and there's an armed struggle, there's a political struggle? These things don't happen in a vacuum. So those are questions to be asked. And then also thinking about future solidarities. I think that's one of the things that is really, really, that's the question before us. Like, how do we form future solidarities? And I think future solidarity is in thinking, you know, having a decolonial lens on Kashmir and, of course, Muslims in the region. And then also thinking about the processes that are taking place here in the US, in the Western Hemisphere, and, you know, indigenous peoples and their struggles, and thinking about Palestinian struggle, and kind of finding an overlap. Not that these struggles are same or these struggles are similar even, but there are overlaps, especially against imperialism, especially against settler colonialism. And Kashmir thus far, especially till 2019, it was very hard to convince people that it's a settler colonial problem. But from 2019 onwards, unfortunately, and fortunately as well for the international community, it has become very brazen to see the Indian settler colonialism has become brazen, but it's also become a little easier for scholars and activists to say that this is exactly what we were saying and this is exactly what we were fearing. So in that sense, sometimes as a Kashmiri scholar, I feel like I have stepped in someone else's nightmare, which is the settler colonialism here in US and Canada and in Palestine. But I think those are the overlaps that we as feminist scholars need to look at. We need to kind of like look at transnational solidarities and the overlaps there and how we can fight this settler colonial neo-imperialism, so to speak. And also thinking about India as the brown imperial colonialism that is happening on Kashmiris at the moment. And so that's I mean, it's not a suggestion, but it's kind of an entryway into suggesting what can be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, I will. I put my email address down, so if someone wants to get in touch, we'll try to facilitate that. Thank you so much. Good night, all of you, and please do sign up to adopt a prisoner. This is something tangible that you do. It'll consist of writing letters, just following up and making sure that these folks behind bars who've sacrificed their lives and their families for the struggle are not forgotten. So inshallah, just keep in touch on that. Assalamu alaikum.